Good morning, everyone, for everyone who's tuned in. And welcome to day 11 of 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence. Just a quick disclaimer, no misogynistic, homophobic, transphobic, or otherwise bigoted language will be tolerated, just to get that out of the way. So today we're speaking with Chriscy Blouws, a gender activist and human rights lawyer from South Africa, on all things human rights law. Chrissy, could you tell us a bit about yourself?
Hi, and hello to everyone tuning in and listening to us today. So my name is Chriscy Blouws, and I'm an attorney. I'm a gender activist, feminist, human rights lawyer, practicing as an attorney in South Africa. And I have been working within the human rights sector for more than 10 years, and specifically also focusing on gender-related issues, equality, and women's rights in South Africa. I am based in Cape Town, South Africa. That's where I was born and raised, and have worked for most of my life, and have worked nationally as well. So I've worked and lived in the Northern Cape as well. And the organization that I work for is called the Women's Legal Center. It's an African feminist law center. It's a one-of-a-kind type of organization in South Africa. And we essentially have a national footprint. So while physically our office is based in Cape Town, South Africa, we have a national footprint and work on women's rights issues across the country.
Oh, that's great. Could you tell us a bit about what is human rights law specifically?
So South Africa has a very specific and rich history, in the context of coming out of an apartheid era and a segregated society, where really in South Africa, historically, people were kind of governed, and law specifically was designed to keep specific races apart and also to create a hierarchy between races, that particularly of white being superior to those in a South African context, which is colored, to those then that are deemed black. So that was kind of the racial segregation and the categorization. And so really based on that, people of the colored and black race were forcibly removed from specific areas, were forcibly removed from land, and were forcibly removed to live in kind of what we call the Cape Flats, informal settlements, so underprivileged areas with lack of access to resources and infrastructure. And so for a long time, that was kind of the state of the way in which people resided in South Africa until our democratic era. So that is around the period between 1993 to 1997, with the establishment of our first Black president, Nelson Mandela, and then the establishment of our constitution in South Africa. And that interim and the final constitution really gave rise to various constitutional and human rights. So our constitution specifically has chapter 2, which contains all of the Bill of Rights, which contains all of the basic human rights that are applicable to anyone who is in South Africa. So you don't have to be a citizen of South Africa. You have to just be within the Republic of South Africa to be protected in terms of all of these rights. And the only right that really is only reserved for citizens of South Africa is the right to vote. But outside the right to vote, every other right is applicable to everyone by virtue of being within the Republic of South Africa. And chapter 2 of our constitution, which is the Bill of Rights, is an extensive array of rights that relate to the right to life, equality, human dignity. So equality will entrench essentially non-discrimination. So, the right not to be discriminated on based on your sex, your nationality, your gender, your sexual orientation, your um, um, pregnancy, all of those types of, it kind of has a non-exhaustive list of criteria that you should not be discriminated against, and kind of defines what discrimination is, and seeks to have a society in which we live that is just and equal for all. And so Bill of Rights is extensive. It speaks to socioeconomic rights, so the right to water, the right to social security protections, the right to adequate housing and access to adequate housing, the rights to health, so the right to an environment, the right to a fair trial. So the Bill of Rights really extends from civil, political to socioeconomic rights. And I think the South African Constitution is really quite lauded across the world for its progressive rights and progressive obligations that the Bill of Rights places within our state. So many of these rights, our states have a positive obligation to progressively realize these rights as and when it is within their financial ambit and ability to do so. But so that is the extent of kind of the birth of human rights within the context of coming out of a colonial segregated apartheid era to coming into a democratic society, which hopes to kind of create restoration and heal all of the injustices of the past by creating this equal and fair society in which people live freely, in which they live with the rights to human dignity and equality. And so that is kind of how we've transitioned as a society in South Africa to this democratic era and human rights based kind of context. But we know, though, that although our constitution seeks and hopes for this, the lived reality for so many is still so far reached. And so we still live in a society where even though we have really beautiful rights on paper, oftentimes the individuals that actually don't have access to those rights, and still we live in a society where we see predominantly women that do not have access to those rights and that still remain the face of discrimination. And then we specifically see the intersectionality of Black women still being the face of poverty and discrimination in South Africa, because of systemic kind of injustices that still exist within our society and in the way that our laws are implemented and interpreted. And so we have this kind of double-edged sword or double society in which the rights on paper really do intend to bring about a specific society, a context, but the lived reality for so many, in particular for women, and then in particular for women of color in South Africa, are still so far removed from what the rights aim to achieve.
Do you find that because of that, a lot of your work and your organization's work is about maybe informing people of the rights that they do have and should exercise, or ways that they can go about doing so?
So the Women's Legal Center, we operate with kind of a multi-pronged approach. And so maybe just to give you some context about human rights work in South Africa. So we have quite a few human rights organizations in South Africa that's registered as non-governmental organizations and non-profit organizations. And a lot of these organizations, tend to focus on specific thematic issues. So you'll have organizations which focus on land justice, organizations which focus on civil political rights and the right to vote, or organizations which focus on migration issues. And so, there are various kind of public interest and human rights organizations in South Africa across the country, national organizations and provincial organizations, which are human rights organizations. Our organization has 5 focus areas. So we have 5 thematic areas which we work on, which is the right to equality in relationships, the right to live in a society free of violence, the right to sexual reproductive health and rights, the right to work in just and favorable conditions of work, and the right to access adequate housing, land, and tenure security. However, we specifically focus on women within those 5 specific areas. And when I say women, we include the diverse spectrum of women within that category. And so when we are working as an organization, we use a multi-pronged approach. So we have a legal advice unit in which women can walk into our office every day, do not have to pay a consultation fee, and can come and speak to a legal advisor just to get a basic sense of what their issue is, what is their legal problem, what is the most appropriate kind of legal solution or organization. And that's the kind of first response and advice that we give. But that's also how we inform the strategic work of the organization to ensure that the work that we do is informed by the lived reality of women, so that when we speak to issues in society, it's not me speaking to a specific issue, but it's speaking to a specific issue because it's informed by the women who literally walk through our door. So that's one aspect of the legal advice that we provide on face value. But then that work filters through to education and training work that we do. So we go back out into communities in which women reside and have specific issues, and we work very closely with women within underprivileged and previously disadvantaged communities in South Africa. So in the Western Cape specifically, we work very closely with women human rights defenders who are on the ground and provide that interface to women within communities and lead women within communities. And that is also how we do the education and training. And once again, that education and training is informed by the women from the communities as well. And then we do strategic public interest litigation. And so this is kind of, something that often people grapple with, because it's not the type of litigation that is individual relief seeking. So it's not the type of litigation where you come with a particular issue and we represent you for your relief. It's the type of litigation that even if it's an individual issue, it links to a systemic problem. And so it's the public interest in that we can be representing you, but to attain systemic relief that will affect all women within the province or within the country. So when we speak about public interest litigation, it's the type of litigation that will set precedent and will change the law for the larger group of women within a specific class, race, nationality, or specific issue within the country. So that's the way in which we work. And then I think most importantly to underline that the most essential value of our organization is that we use an intersectional lens in the way in which we work, because we believe and understand that no one woman experiences discrimination the same way. So based on your specific intersecting identity, and so like your race, your class, your sexual orientation, your nationality, all of those intersecting aspects of your identity inform your lived reality. And so no one woman experiences something the exact same way. And so we use this intersectional lens to ensure that we create feminist jurisprudence. So feminist kind of case law that is rooted in the lived reality and context of women in South Africa.
That's great. Do you have an example of a case like that? So a gender-related human rights case that you've worked on that may have been individual, but would have also been bigger picture?
Yeah, I can definitely speak to a few of these cases. And I think because we have 5 focus areas, the way in which we use this intersectional lens is not just in terms of the client and her intersectionalities, but also an intersectional lens to see how a woman who experiences a human rights violation in relation to land and housing at the same time experiences in relation to health at the same, because all of those things are also intersected. So where someone lives, for example, a woman who lives in the Cape Flats or in an informal settlement has a issue in relation to geographically where she is situated. But because geographically where she is situated, she has restricted access to rights to health, to policing or adequate policing and safety issues, so all of those intersecting issues come into play. And one of the cases that we worked on over the past few years, so also maybe just to say, in South Africa, as a human rights organization, there is various ways in which you can litigate. So you can litigate as an organization in your own name based on the research that the organization has conducted and the expertise it brings with it, or you can litigate on behalf of a client. Or often what human rights organizations also do is litigate as a friend of the court. So an amicus curiae. So that's where you come to the court. So there'll be party A and party B litigating against each other. But in this litigation, there may be a constitutional issue that is actually underlying the litigation. And as an independent organization with specific expertise in that constitutional issue, you come before the court as a friend of the court to say, you're litigating party A and party B on a specific issue, but there's this constitutional issue that's also involved here. And as an expert organization within this issue, we're coming into the case as an independent party and coming as a friend of the court to kind of bring a certain perspective before the court. And this was what we had done in this specific case, which is a case I can speak to of a more recent years. And what has happened is that in our South African law, so we have something called the COIDA legislation, and it's basically compensation legislation. So the law that protects people when they are injured or deceased in or because of their work. And ordinarily, what would happen is that where someone is injured in the workplace or dies because of their work or at the workplace, they would be able to claim from the compensation fund, or their family as dependents or spouse will be able to claim from the compensation fund. And what we had is a domestic worker who had worked in her employer's home for several years and had died during the scope of her employment. And when her daughter went to the compensation fund, she was unable to claim from the compensation fund because domestic workers who worked in private homes was a specific exclusion from the compensation legislation. And so her daughter was represented by lawyers and approached our high court, and was represented by human rights lawyers as well. An organization called SERI represented her against the Department of Labor to say that it was unconstitutional and unfair that she was discriminated from being able to claim compensation because the exclusion of the fact that her mom was a domestic worker who worked in a private home was unjustifiable and unreasonable. Like, what is the link to that exclusion? And so they had made out this case around the fact that it was unfair and it was discriminatory and unconstitutional, and that the law should be changed. And this is a law that has existed and is almost as old as our Constitution, because the law exists to give effect to the right in the Bill of Rights to Social Security, right? And so what you then have is a society of over 20 years in which women who conduct domestic work in private homes are not covered when every other worker is covered. And we intervened in this case at our constitutional court, which is our apex court. And we came to say to the court that as much as we understand that it's discrimination of domestic workers, we cannot leave it there. We need to put this intersectional and feminist lens before the court, because if we actually break this case down to a face, it is Black women who have been discriminated for more than 20 years, because the statistics show us that globally, the domestic work sector is a feminized sector. So I think the statistics in terms of ILO puts it at like 70 or 80% as women within the domestic work sector. But in a South African sector, of that 80%, which is women, majority of that is Black women. And that is a very high statistic. So it is not as if all women have been left out of this compensation legislation. It's particularly Black women. And we said to the court that you need to understand the historical context of that. It's Black women. And for years, Black women's work has been undervalued, underpaid. And so we cannot just litigate without putting this face and this intersectional lens before the court, because it shows how serious that discrimination actually is, that our own law still views Black women's work in this way, and that our own lawmakers have viewed Black women's work as not deserving of that social security and protection. That is not a request or a nice to have, but is actually a right in terms of international law and in terms of our domestic law. So that's an example of the way in which we litigated the specific issue on gender, race, and class, and put that lens before the court. And we were successful. We were successful in being admitted as the friend of the court to bring the specific lens. And the court specifically took from our submissions within its judgment. And it's one of the first instances in which our court expressly said that intersectionality must be adopted within legislation, or within litigation rather, because it then renders visible a specific group that previously was rendered invisible in our law and in our society. And so something like that was a major victory for us in the way in which we work and the work that we do, because it had our apex court acknowledge this need for an intersectional and feminist lens.
That is a powerful example. It shows the importance of the work that you do, the importance of intersectionality, the importance of considering every factor in these cases. Your mention of the fund reminded me of, so we don't have such a fund here. We don't have anything that even remotely looks like that. And we also don't have a national human rights institution here. So I wanted to ask, what is the role of the National Human Rights Institution in South Africa, and does it function well in your opinion?
So we have what we call Chapter 9 institutions in South Africa. And the Chapter 9 institutions are called so because of its provision as it's made for within our Constitution. So our Constitution has Chapter 9 that specifically designates various institutions that must be created in order to promote the work of the Constitution, the rights of the Constitution, and to be in essence, the watchdog and the protector and promoter of these various rights. And so we have quite a few Chapter 9 organizations in South Africa. Some of the institutions to mention is the Public Protector's Office, the South African Human Rights Commission, which is the one that you're specifically referring to. We have the Commission for the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Cultural, Religious, and Linguistic Communities. We have the Commission for Gender Equality. We have the Auditor General, the Electoral Commission. So there's quite a few organizations or institutions that have been established in terms of Chapter 9 of our Constitution to give effect to these rights and promote. And so the South African Human Rights Commission, I think, is celebrating almost 25 years of its existence. I think it's celebrating 25 years this year or either next year, but it's essentially 25 years old. And that's a milestone for our constitutional democracy, and essentially what the South African Human Rights Commission is mandated to do is to promote and protect the human rights in South Africa. And so the institution functions in a few different ways, one of it being education and awareness as well. And so you'll have the South African Human Rights Commission, who is based in every province, or I think most provinces, but has this national reach as well. So it has its head office in Gauteng, which is another province, but then it has provincial offices across South Africa. And that is also so because you'll find that every province has different kind of human rights issues that it's dealing with based on the context of where you are. And so every province essentially has different focus areas that it has as its predominant area of work. But the commission itself, in terms of promotion and awareness, has the campaign to create advocacy campaigns, awareness and education and training through its advocacy offices that it has, and also through community kind of defenders that it works with for the Human Rights Commission. but it also is a watchdog in the sense that people are able to report complaints of human rights violation to the commission itself. It also serves as like a walk-in service where individuals are able to walk into the Human Rights Commission offices, speak to legal officers within the commission, and report certain complaints. And what they do often as well is to have kind of investigations into certain complaints. If it's in relation to a specific human rights issue within a specific area or province, they'll often have investigations to which they call relevant organizations or party to provide information on specific human rights issues. And so that's another way in which it gathers its information. But the commission itself is able to investigate the complaints that are lodged with them and then to provide certain recommendations and reports on those specific issues. It's also able to kind of subpoena or bring relevant stakeholders together in relation to a specific issue. Over the past few years, we have seen various human rights issues, but specifically as well in relation to racism, which is still very rife in South Africa and in different communities. And so you'd have, for example, instances where people are able to lodge complaints with the commission and they investigate and report and make recommendations. Or alternatively, they also have the mandate to investigate if an issue comes to their attention. And so a lot of, for example, racist remarks that have been made either through schools or individuals on social media have been investigated by the commission. And in some instances, the Human Rights Commission is also able to litigate specific issues in terms of its mandate. So that's the Human Rights Commission, how it is based across South Africa, and also the way in which it works. And the mandate is really to promote all of the rights in terms of the Bill of Rights. And essentially, you should be able to speak to any of those rights to the commission. And that's how it functions and deems to function in a South African context. Whether it is working well, I think, like I said at the outset, our constitution really, in the way that it was written, really seeks to achieve a society that is built on kind of all of these constitutional values and democratic values. And I think the commission in and of itself is a wonderful initiative and institution, as it's mandated to kind of exist in line with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and very necessary within our society. I think whether the question about whether it functions well or not will really depend on who you're asking that to. Because I think people on the ground may have a different perspective and interaction, whereas stakeholders within local government may have different interaction or perceptions with the commission, whereas human rights lawyers within the sector would have different interactions with the commission. So I think that question really depends on who you're asking it to and in what context. And I think a lot of the times as well, this is not just for the commission, but for human rights work in general. I feel that a lot of times in different contexts, there is a lot of tension around human rights work, because even, for example, public interest litigation takes a very long time. You can have a class action or a public interest case that takes several years, and then that's several years in the High Court. And once you get a judgment there, it's appealed to the Supreme Court of Appeal, and that takes another few years. And then, it doesn't stop there. There's potential to appeal it even further to the Constitutional Court. And so I think the issue of human rights becomes a contentious issue generally for people on the ground and within the communities, because we know that the law takes so long and really can only take you so far. And for people who live in dire states within communities every day, kind of need resolutions and urgent attention, which the law or human rights doesn't always bring to them. And I think those are some of the tensions that exist.
Okay, so that was another question that I had, is where do you think human rights law falls short, and what would sort of fill that gap? So that's where it falls short. You
Yeah, I think
mentioned,
yeah.
sorry, go on.
Now, I think that missing of a lived reality lens is often what falls short. I say this because you law in and of itself is a very exclusive arena, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you haven't studied law, people are able to speak an entire language that you can sit in court and not understand, even when you are the client. You have to kind of trust that your lawyer is representing you to the best of their ability, and you're not sure half of the time because the court and the legal space is a very exclusive space. The way people dress and speak is very exclusive and very far-fetched from the lived reality of people who don't have access to law. And this is why I have a very particular kind of lens through which I have chosen to practice law over the years and the organizations that I've worked with, because I believe that your work needs to be informed by your client. Sometimes you can think that you have the best strategy or know the best thing, but the best way kind of and what communities need is for initiatives to be informed by them and their lived realities. And I think that's sometimes where the law falls short. And I think the law falls short because also it's inaccessible. To get a lawyer is expensive. To access the high court is really expensive, because even where there are human rights issues, you still need advocates and senior counsel often for certain instances, and that's expensive. And people in communities that have issues that need to be dealt with don't have that type of access unless they come through one of our human rights organizations. But then you could still come through a human rights organization who, because of funding and capacity restrictions, are not able to take on a case, right? And is not able to
Mm-hmm.
litigate every single case that comes through its door. So those
Mm-hmm.
are some of the gaps, as well as to where the law falls short for community members.
Okay, so you sort of summarized or led into the last two questions, which would be what if someone's human rights are violated in South Africa, what would be their next step? So it would be to one of these human rights organizations to file a complaint. And then the next question was, how does your firm sort of operate in a nonprofit way, and where does that funding come from, if you're able to share that?
Yeah. So I think also just to say, so firstly, with our organization, we are entirely donor funded. And so we have to fundraise for the work that we do. That does bring with it, like most human rights organizations, capacity issues. And so, it's often kind of a world in which human rights organizations have to kind of be specific about the mandate of the organization and the work that it could do. But that's why we focus on having a legal advice unit that brings in that first instance kind of interface with communities, and where women are able to at least get an initial consultation with the initial basic information, advice, or referrals, so that we don't kind of send women from pillar to post or leave them with no understanding of what their rights are. And so that's the way in which we try to reach more women and then have that feed our thematic issues. But I wanted to speak to where people go to for human rights complaints. I think that we have an extensive legal framework in South Africa. And so while we have our Bill of Rights with so many kind of rights, constitutional rights and values, we have a vast extent of organizations which seek to give effect to those rights. So it will all depend on the particular issue you have. Because if you are experiencing something within what we call the civil law, you would have civil avenues. So if it's, for example, domestic violence, you could go to a magistrate's court, have a clerk help you fill in a protection order application form, and it's almost a feminist kind of idea of a court, in that it is designed to give immediate, speedy, affordable relief to victims or survivors of domestic violence. And so you
Right.
should be able to go to court on the same day, fill out the application form, and if on the face of it the magistrate can make out a case for domestic violence, they need to give you an interim protection order, which seeks to give you the interim relief and protection. And you're able to serve that on the police and the person that's committing the domestic violence against you. And then because then we have the right to a fair trial, that person needs to have a date to come back to court. So they also have their day in court to explain, defend the issue. But so that would be for like the domestic violence. We have domestic violence courts. For sexual offenses, for example, we have sexual offenses courts as well. For labor issues. So if you had an issue within your workplace and you didn't have the means to afford a labor lawyer, we have also what we call the CCMA, which is the kind of speedy resolution court, not a court, but a space to, so it's for arbitration of labor issues, for example, or for conciliation of labor issues. And so it's to bring parties together with mediators to mediate specific labor issues. So we have various institutions that are developed by the state as well to give effect to various rights and complaints that people have. And if you had a criminal issue, you would be able to go to the police station, lay a charge, in which the police then act as the investigator, prosecutor for the specific criminal incident. So to answer your question about where people go to, I think there is an extent of institutions that have been designed and developed to give effect to the protection of those rights. It's all about access once again. You'll find that in the Western Cape, if you are far removed and live in the urban periphery, you don't really have access to those institutions if they're based in the CBD, in the town central, and you're living on the urban periphery. So too in other provinces in South Africa, if you're living in a rural context, you're also really far removed from these institutions and offices that should be giving you access to justice. So once again, it boils down to access, and whether on paper we have the institutions, we have the rights, but in reality, do we substantively have access to all of these things?
Right. And that goes back to the point that you made earlier about I have the rights on paper, but it's can I access and am I aware of these rights and how to go about accessing them? Could you tell us a bit more about your activism and maybe why you went into human rights law?
Yeah, I think on a personal level, I myself was born and raised in the Cape Flats. So that's a poor, underprivileged, previously disadvantaged community. And a lot of my family still live within the community. And so I have seen firsthand from my personal experience the social ills that exist in communities of color. My grandparents and their parents were forcibly removed from well situated areas and displaced to the Cape Flats. And so that's the direct consequence of the societal issues and discrimination that we faced as a family, seeing violence in firsthand as a child, growing up within these communities, the social ills, the lack of access to various essential institutions such as education or health, and then, even now still having family that lives within those societies, seeing the social ills that they are still exposed to. And that really informed my passion for human rights. But it also gave me a sense of that lived reality and why lived reality is essential to me, because I understand that dynamic and the intersectional issues that come at play. And it also informed my activism for women's rights specifically, because I saw firsthand how women in my community were always the face of discrimination, were always the face of violence, still is to date. And so that informed my passion, and that informed my work, that really informed the way in which I choose to conduct my work even now. And so, yeah, that's how it started. And even at a university level, when I was pursuing my LLB, so my law degree, I was involved in various initiatives within the university and led initiatives such as the Street Law Project, which used popular education methods and education tools to go back into high schools to teach high school students about human rights, about our democracy, because that's not something you're taught in our kind of school history, right? We weren't taught about our own democratic society at the time, and we weren't taught at the time about what human rights were, and we weren't taught even at a university level about intersectionality or what like a feminist lens is to litigation. So, I became involved at a very young age in my kind of activism within underprivileged communities, and continued that even though I then professionally was admitted as an attorney. I've always kind of walked the activism along with the legal route, because I just know that a multi-pronged approach is needed if we want to affect change and affect lives.
It is, and you're doing it. You have the lived experience, you have the education. What I wanted to ask, what is the, if you're comfortable saying, what is your community think of the work that you're doing now? The friends and family you still have there, what do they think of your work?
So I think this is, this is a great question, because it speaks to community narratives and stereotypes. And I face different types of backlash depending on the work that I'm doing. And I don't just face that within my community or family, but within even the legal society. Because what we find in this day and age is that I think everyone is able to kind of comprehend human rights. And everyone is able to kind of comprehend, if I like the example that I gave you earlier about the domestic worker and labor rights and how that was unjust. I think almost everyone would kind of agree with those types of things. But there are more contentious topics that you then speak about, where you see that still, because of social, religious, and cultural norms and patriarchal values that exist in our society, which still view women or view women's bodies in a specific light, brings in that contention. And so I would say, from a family perspective, I think I'm largely supported in the human rights work that I'm doing and have done over the years. But I think over the past few years, we've kind of seen, just an increase in the reports of sexual harassment within workplaces, within the human rights sectors, within the legal profession, and then globally, I mean, with the Me Too movement, with, in South Africa, we had the Am I Next, hashtag Am I Next, and globally in different countries, there were all of these movements of women speaking out against violence in really professional settings and in different kind of spaces. And I think that is where we do continue to see a little bit more backlash in the
Right.
support of women being able to speak out against violence. I'm doing a lot of work, and over the past few years, I have done extensive work in South Africa around women's rights to freely speak about their violence and to publicly name their perpetrators, because we've seen just an increase over the past few years of perpetrators using the law to silence women. So where a woman has spoken out, that very perpetrator interdicting her or threatening her with defamation. And while I think people would understand that there will be some reputational loss, the vision around this area of work is to understand that South Africa, I think statistics show South Africa has the highest rates of violence, domestic violence and intimate violence. And I think we're dubbed like the rape capital of the world. Like in South Africa, the president of our country has named violence against women a second pandemic after COVID. And so the work that I've been doing over the past few years is saying to people that if you're living in a society where violence is that rife against women, where statistics show us how rape and sexual violence is so pervasive, we have to then live in a society where women are able to speak freely, because that's the only way we end impunity of perpetrators. Violence only thrives in silence because of the social stigmas that is placed on survivors of violence, even though it's not your fault. Society blames you for either not speaking up or for speaking up. Or society doesn't believe women because we're salacious or we're gossipers, because that is the societal and the patriarchal
Mhm.
stigmas that are still placed on women when they speak about violence. And so I've been doing a lot of work over the past few years to just empower a space where women are able to speak freely and to publicly name their perpetrators in the context of violence in South Africa, and in the context that the speaking out is the only way to end that impunity of
Mhm.
perpetrators. But that is something, for example, that not everyone agrees with, understandably
Mhm.
so, because it's an issue or case or work that balances various rights as well. But it's about, once again, going back to context, because the
Yeah.
context shows us that something needs to be done urgently to help curb the scourge of violence in South Africa, especially against women, and especially against women and children.
Mhm. And again, it goes back to the rights are here on paper, but there's also the social impact, the mindset, the misogynistic beliefs of the public. Um, I wanted to ask that because you there are so many human rights organizations that I did wonder, is there that backlash that we certainly get here in the
Yeah,
Bahamas, just sharing these flyers for
yeah,
the 16 days of activism? People are
yeah.
angry and saying that this is unnecessary or misunderstanding
Mhm,
the term gender-based violence,
mhm.
and it's puzzling, but it's not puzzling. So I did want to ask what your experience was, and it's sad. It shows that despite so much work being done, despite
Yeah.
everything being laid out on paper, like you said, of a almost idyllic democratic
Mhm.
society, that there is still so much work to do on the ground, and
Yeah.
it is frustrating. I don't doubt that your days are long and hard, but it's so important to have these discussions. Your work is important, and to just get the word out. So I'm so excited. As I said, I was sending your website to people who are in the field of law, 'cause this is great work.
Thank you.
And I knew, I just had a feeling there was a lot of backlash, and
Yeah.
it shouldn't be. Um, well, as we come to a close, is there something that you wanted to maybe leave our listeners with?
No, thank you so much for having this conversation with us. I think it's been great to meet your organization as well, and just to have this platform to kind of share work and collaborate and create synergies. And I think, just in parting, I would like to say, I think the backlash often is fueled with exactly what you said now. It's a misunderstanding.
Mhm.
And I think oftentimes when we describe, I mean, we're unapologetically African feminist in our mission and values. And a lot of the times people think that automatically that needs to exclude other groups.
Yes.
And the point, and I think that's where the misunderstanding and backlash then is fueled, because what I always say to people is not, so we don't, for example, we don't mean to say that there isn't a different group that also experiences violence, or that men don't experience violence, or that other groups don't experience various sorts of discrimination. That is not what we're saying. And also there are organizations who do specifically speak to men and their issues. For
Mhm.
example, there are organizations designed to speak to different types of groups and individuals and people. So we're not denying that discrimination happens in other spaces or in other ways. The position that we come from is understanding the context and the statistics. And they show us starkly that even in a society that is, South Africa, actually, I think in terms of statistics, is also ranked one of the most unequal states in the world. So, like that factors in socioeconomic
Mhm.
factors as well. So, even in a state of being one of the most unequal societies, even in that stark inequality, the face is still women and the face is still women of color.
Right.
And so
Mhm.
that I think that misinformation and lack of understanding, I think, fuels the backlash. But like I said, I think in parting, it's that we're not saying that it doesn't happen in other spaces or to other groups. We're just saying, if you look at what happens on the ground every day, the face of discrimination is women and it's women of color. And therefore, our work is informed by that context.
Mm-hmm. A very important distinction to make, and it's important to look to understand instead of trying to confirm biases. This
Yes.
is the problem we're facing, and this is us trying to fix it, not
Yeah.
exclude anyone. That's a great
Yeah.
distinction.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us and spending this time with us, and sharing some of the great work that you've been doing. We will have another session tonight for anyone on Facebook Live. That's 6 p.m. with myself and Carla Moore. I'll put the links in the comments. So yes, thank you, Chrissy, for joining us. I hope you have a
Thank you so
great
much for
evening
having
and evening
us.
where you are.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.